if they had been in NATO, Putin wouldn't have invaded them.
Okay.
And also they say,
people say that.
Also say, if we hadn't collectively basically bullied Ukraine into giving up their nuclear deterrent, he wouldn't have done it either, because they would have had a nuclear weapon to defend themselves.
This is super crazy.
Is it crazy?
Yes, it is. He didn't take Crimea.
But he did take Crimea. Can you say any of that to Putin?
Of course not.
Why not?
Because I'm not
So when he invaded, though, what would you let him do? Do you actually want him to win?
well, Zelensky is a hero. How could you say that?
What the f are these guys going to disagree about? So, for all the faults of our fellow European crazy people, I think for Europeans, the Nazis, World War II, Russia is still just a little bit more present. And I think that Piers is still a big, like, the Nazis were definitely the bad guys and Russia is definitely the bad guy. I think Piers still holds that opinion. So he's probably not going to be as okay with Tucker Carlson, who is a full-on neo-Nazi / Russian simp now. So
I don't agree with you about him or Ukraine. I went to interview him in Kyiv, and he's an extraordinary story. Obviously, this comedian who becomes president, having played the comedian who was a president in a comedy show, right? And I've seen what you said about it. I mean, what's interesting to me on a bigger picture about Ukraine, Russia, your views, a lot of conservative views in America, is that 30 years ago, there would have been no element of resistance from the conservative side about taking on a Russian dictator who'd invaded a European country. I know it's a lot more complicated. I know the history, but a lot of very smart people on, a lot of people you've interviewed. And, you know, I do learn a lot each time I talk about all the history, obviously. My brother was a British Army colonel. My sister married a British Army colonel. They've all engaged in conflicts around the world. And so it's complicated. There's no doubt that on the Russian side, they believe they were provoked into doing this. I know that you have sympathy with that view. There's also no doubt from the Ukrainian side that they believe since the 90s they've been this sovereign democratic country, albeit not perfect. You think deeply flawed. I think they've been imperfect, trying to improve. And Zelensky has actually, I think, been a force for good, not bad. But ultimately, what's happened now is that you have a situation where, as Donald Trump told me recently, you know, it's just the mowing fields now, where you have thousands of young men being killed, often on a daily basis, on both sides. And no one's winning this war, it seems to me. And if anyone is going to win it, it's likely to be Russia, not Ukraine. And then what happens? And that concerns me enormously. If the West allows Putin to just take the land he's taken, what guarantee do we have he won't try and take the rest of Ukraine? He took Crimea. He's back for more. I think he wants the whole of Ukraine. I think he won't stop there if he's allowed to get it. I think he's a pretty ruthless, evil Russian dictator. How are
we defining, just to define the term so we can follow the same term?
How are we defining evil, ruthless, and dictator?
What's a dictator?
A dictator to me is somebody, well, I would start by saying you have no respect for democratic norms, a free and fair election.
So so like, is he about to say so an unelected bureaucrat? Please don't. Please don't do that, Tucker. You're smarter than this. This is evil if he really is about to say this.
Elected leader would be a dictator.
Well, you wouldn't.
Please don't do this.
Argue that Putin, for example, has free and fair elections.
No, I'm not that interested actually.
Not
really, it's not my country. I'm interested in my leaders, whether, you know, they have the consent of their people. It's not of great interest to me. Whether, I do think Putin's like way more popular than, you know, Joe Biden.
To his people.
Yes.
Weird, bro, but okay.
More popular in Russia than Biden was ever popular.
I wouldn't dispute that. But why are you so against Zelensky?
No, I'm just trying to understand when you dismiss Putin as a dictator, which totally fair, I guess, but I'm just trying to understand what you mean by dictator. So the first criterion for dictatorship is that you're not elected. And what else? Because Zelensky's obviously not elected either.
Yeah,
so I'm just trying to kind of figure out what you're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. We're doing Russian apologia today. One of the popular Russian dog whistles. I don't know how to get over all this shit. One of the things I was speaking to a friend last night is that all of the messaging on everything now is like you have to be aware of all the things that are being said and intimately aware of all of the topics, or else you can't identify what people are hinting at. And this came up about RFK Jr. Because when an ordinary person hears somebody say, oh, for vaccines, like, I mean, I think they're good. I just want to research them. I just think we need to follow the science on that. I think we need to research their safety. Like, to an ordinary person who doesn't know anything, that sounds good. Yeah, we should. Yeah, that sounds good, right? And it's like, hold on. If somebody's talking about vaccines and saying this, they're just anti-vax. That's what that means. You're not, but you don't, but like, you sound crazy saying that. You sound like an insane person. Well, what's wrong with following the research and being, this person doesn't follow the research? Do you think these things are not researched? Do you think we have never done? Do you know what the FDA is, or do you know the history of vaccines at all? Or like, it's just like nobody. But you have to be so in the zone and like in these worlds to even understand the dog whistles. And then if you try to just call out the dog whistle, you sound crazy because you're disagreeing with things that you can't disagree with. And the neo-Nazi stuff is the same. Everything that we're probably about to hear from Tucker Carlson is going to be the same. This Russian talking point is Zelensky is bad because he's not democratic, because they suspended elections, because he's the real dictator. The reality is that one, Zelensky was elected initially, and two, by Ukrainian law, they don't hold elections during war. They just don't do it. So he's not a dictator. They're literally following the law of the country. And Putin is not somebody who is like martial lawing his way into dictatorship. He just is a dictator. He always has been. It's just fucking, or as long as he's been in leadership. So this is a stupid fucking comparison.
Because Zelensky's obviously not elected either.
Yeah,
so I'm just trying to
He shouldn't even agree. Well, maybe he's about to disagree with that.
kind of figure out what you're talking about.
Well, your comparison with Zelensky and Putin over the last 2 years, I found baffling because you seem to think there's some moral equivalence between the two. And Zelensky hasn't illegally invaded another country. Do you not have a problem with what Putin's done?
Hold on. I just want to know what a dictator is. I just want to know. I mean, maybe
This is ever since I learned about these, I see this happening so much more as well. It's hard to understand this because it's like you feel like something is wrong, but you can't say what's wrong because it's just hard to put into words what's happening. That when we talk to people, there are these like maxims of conversation that have to exist. All four of these have to exist. Otherwise, you cannot communicate with another human being, right? So I think what these have to do with is the idea that when you're communicating with somebody else with language, both of you are making an effort to understand each other. You have to be. Because, so for instance, when you're having a conversation, these are I think, four maxims that, what was this, Grice? I don't know, some language theorist guy identified, or girl maybe. Quantity, where one tries to be as informative as one possibly can and gives as much information as is needed and no more, right? So what this means is that like if somebody says like, oh, like what did you do today? And you were like, oh, I went to work and then I stopped by Burger King and then I came home, right? Well, is that a lie? You did way more than that today. Or what if the person like rushes over to you and starts doing CPR and then calls 911? It's like, well, you didn't say that you let your heart beat today, or that you were breathing today, or you didn't say that you used the bathroom at all today. So you're holding in your pee and poop all day. Are you going to explain? Like, no, hold on. There's only a certain amount of, like, you only need as much information as to answer the question of what I understand it is that you're asking, right? Or quality, where one tries to be truthful and does not give information that is false or that is not supported by evidence. I think quality has to do with like, if somebody says, oh, did you play basketball today? And you're like, oh yeah, I played basketball with some friends. And in reality, you know, you went home and you like played one game of NBA Jam or something. It's like, well, that's not what we're talking about. I think is quality relation, where one tries to be relevant and says things that are pertinent to the discussion. So if somebody says like, oh, like, what did you study in school? And a guy's like, oh, I read all the guides on 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons. So it's like, that's not what we're asking. Manner, when one tries to be as clear, as brief, and as orderly as one can in what one says, and where one avoids obscurity and ambiguity. All of these like maxims are important, and everybody is following these at all points in time, because otherwise like language would be meaningless. But I noticed in a lot of these like bad faith conversations, somebody is like deliberately breaking a maxim, and I don't know if they're aware of it, like consciously that they're breaking a maxim, or if they're just doing it as like a bad faith technique. But this thing of like, oh, both of them aren't elected, right? When we say elected, like, what does that actually mean? I don't know if this would be quality or manner. Like, we're not talking about the same thing here, but you're pretending it is, but that's not true. They're breaking like this cooperative principle of conversation in order to further this. And you could probably tie this into a bunch of fallacious logic and sophistry and all that bullshit as well, but
maybe he's a better guy than Putin or whatever, and you could say some things about one or nothing, but like if we're just going to define dictator, the first feature of a dictator is he's not elected. So Zelensky's not elected. He's also
like, because if this is a real conversation, and also Zelensky was elected, so I don't know why I keep saying that. If this is a real conversation and they were really having a back and forth, and because what Tucker Carlson is doing right now, and this is all, there's so many levels to this. No, there's not that many. There's like 2 or 3. But like what Tucker Carlson is doing is he's giving the appearance of being a good faith interlocutor. Oh, let me understand your definitions. But he's not actually trying to understand the definitions. He's trying to trap them in the definitions. That's what he's doing. Like, oh, okay, well, what's a dictator? And I'm looking for a definition that I know isn't going to include or will also include Zelensky. But like, if he's being good faith, we would obviously say there's probably a difference in quality of a guy who's not elected during a time of war, when the country's laws allow for him to be there during a time of war, versus a guy who just like rigs his elections. This is very clearly, these are 2 different things, but he's pretending it's the same. So,
well, he's banned a religious denomination. He's murdered his political opponents. He has banned a language group. Those all seem like features of dictatorship to me. Now, he has the support of the British intelligence agencies. That doesn't mean he's not a dictator, though. That sounds like a dictator. I mean, if I just gave you a piece of paper and I'm like, here are some qualities of a European leader.
Like, if Piers is like in his full debate bro mindset, then he needs to come back with like, well, what do you think we're actually talking about right now? Like, you recognize that there's a difference between Ukraine being at war and somebody having wartime powers versus a guy in time of peace who is probably still rigging elections and everything, right? Like,
you would say, well, that's not legitimate. That guy's a dictator. I can't support that. But his name's Zelensky, and he was once a comedian, and he does my show, so he's not a dictator. I think it's a dictator.
Well, I would argue that if you look at the history of Ukraine since the 90s, since it became a, one of a better phrase, democratic country, as they would say, well, I mean, by the same criteria you support Putin being popular in his country, I think just under 90% of Ukrainians voted for it. You wouldn't dispute that?
Well, first of all, the country had a coup sponsored by the United States government, the CIA.
so wait, how was he even, hold on.
History of Ukraine.
He's once a comedian, and he does my show, so he's not a dictator. I think it's a dictator.
Well, I would argue that if you look at the history of Ukraine since the 90s, since it became a, one of a better phrase, democratic country, as they would say, well, I mean, by the same criteria you support Putin being popular in his country, I think just under 90% of Ukrainians voted for it. You wouldn't dispute that?
So that was not really responsive. I don't know if Piers can tell what's going on, or if he's just trying to be more casual here, or they're being friendly, or...
Well, first of all, the country had a coup sponsored by the United States government, the CIA, in 2000.
This is also all lies. We're just going to rehash. It's like the same 10. It's not even 10 talking points. Fuck, I should have made a list. I'm too lazy beforehand. 2014 was a coup. We know it because of the Victoria Nuland call. Zelensky is a dictator, and he's trying to ban, or he already banned the Russian language, and he kills political opponents. Something about NATO expansionism is going to be in here. Something about Ukrainians don't want to fight. You can tell because they're dodging the draft. Something about maybe that missile that hit Poland. Nord Stream 2 is probably going to get brought up. Like,
2014. So everything that happened subsequent to that, I don't think we could call part of the democratic process. But just Zelensky personally is not elected. He's not an elected leader. He rules by force. There's no election that gives him legitimacy. So that's not a defense of Putin. It's merely an attack on the idea that Putin's the only dictator in this contest. How is Zelensky not a dictator?
Do you think Putin's a dictator?
Like he just doesn't respond to any of that.
Guess, yeah. I mean, I guess. I mean, if I stand up outside the Kremlin and say, down with Vladimir Putin, I'm probably in trouble. That's why I don't live in Russia.
Right. I certainly think that Ukraine has had a lot of corruption.
No, but is Zelensky legitimate? How's he legitimate if he's not elected? Well, how could you support an unelected leader?
Well, he's the president of the country.
Well, he calls himself that, but there's no election that made him president. He blew past the election and said, oh, there's a war. We can't have an election. We're going to change the Constitution. So how is that a legitimate leader? How could you support something like that? That seems, I don't know.
Like these other laws, it would actually be, I'm pretty sure it's illegal for them to hold an election. Like it would be violative of the law to do so.
Dictatorship.
Well, I would categorize my support for him as supporting him against an illegal invasion by
Maybe Piers just doesn't even know this.
Russia.
So this is like why we support Stalin against Hitler, because
well, in a way, we had
Hitler's bad, so Stalin must be good. But no, Stalin's also a dictator. So like, how about we just don't support dictators if we're against supporting dictators? Or you can take my position, which is, I don't want a dictatorship in my own country because I live in a free country, but we're going to have relations with the country that helps us most, up to a certain limit. We're not going to like be allies with Stalin because that's too evil. We're not, Winston Churchill or, FDR or something. We're not going to do that.
Winston Churchill is actually evil, so he's fully adopted those neo-Nazi historical revisionist talking points from that one guy. That's good.
But in general, we will deal with countries that help us. But when we start having moral conversations about other countries, then we have to stick by our own standards. And by your standard, you're supporting a dictator. No, I wonder how you can do that, Piers Morgan.
I'm not saying they're morally pure in Ukraine. I'm not saying they're not riddled with
corruption. But how is
corruption.
he not a dictator?
No, here's my point to you. My defense of them...
Bloodthirsty dictator. Bloodthirsty dictator.
My defense of them is based on the illegal invasion by Russia. You and I can argue about whether Russia was goaded and provoked into doing that. I do not think anything justifies what they actually did.
That's a totally fair position. I mean, I guess I disagree, sort of, but I don't think what you're saying is crazy at all.
But
how is that more illegal than running a country without an election and banning a religious denomination? I don't understand that. So, yeah.
I don't believe either of those things happen, but okay.
You could certainly say Putin did a lot.
Wait, they think Churchill is evil. Why is that? One of the big goals of neo-Nazis is to engage in as much historical revisionism as possible. Remember, it actually goes back to the Steve Bannon thing. You can't make things sound better, but you can drive up negatives on the other side. The goal isn't to say that like the Holocaust didn't happen. It's to say, well, everybody else was really, really, really evil and really bad too. Maybe even worse than Hitler. Like that's always the goal. And then maybe you downplay the Holocaust a little bit. Sure, the Holocaust happened, but like 6 million, come on. Probably maybe a couple million, maybe. And more Soviets died. And, Hitler, everybody was bad then. Like that's always...
A lot of bad things. I would readily agree to that to the extent I understand it. But we're supporting, my government and your government particularly, are supporting this dictator in Ukraine who's oppressing Christians, who is banning people's native language and books in their native language. He's a book burner. And like, that's totally cool because we hate Putin. That's not totally cool, is it?
So would you just let Putin take Ukraine?
I would say let's have an election in Ukraine and let the Ukrainian people elect their own leader and get rid of the midget dictator who now oppresses them, Zelensky. And I would definitely not support a guy who's not elected as a democratic figure because by definition, he's not. By definition. I don't care who his enemies are. He's not worth calling a beacon of democracy if he doesn't even have... Why not have an election in Ukraine today? Because we've got a war. We had elections in our country during the Second World War, so did you. Like, why?
Yeah, but those are the rules in our country. Destiny, the U.S. had elections during the Civil War, but you can actually argue that was less democratic than postponing the election. Like half the country wasn't part of the presidential election. It was probably the right thing to do, but still. Wasn't there, I don't remember, but I thought there was, was it for Ulysses S. Grant? Wasn't there a really fucked election where like the electors were actually being like straight out fucking rigged? Like it was fucked. I thought this is where the Electoral Count Act came from, was because the election was so fucked. Was it Hayes? Or maybe it was Hayes. I don't remember. Like our country was super fucked in terms of how this election went down. And I think it spawned the Electoral Count Act afterwards. I don't remember the reasons why or everything, but Hayes in 1876. Okay. This was the Compromise of 1877, or the Corrupt Bargain, was an unwritten political deal in the U.S. to settle the intense dispute over the results of the 1876 presidential election, ending the filibuster of the certified results and the threat of political violence in exchange for an end to federal reconstruction. No written evidence of such a deal exists, and its precise details are a matter of historical debate, but most historians agree that the federal government adopted a policy of leniency towards the South to ensure federal authority in Republican Rutherford B. Hayes' election as president. The existence of an informal agreement to secure Hayes' political authority, known as the Bargain of 1877, was long accepted as part of American history. Its supposed terms are reviewed by historian C. Van Woodward in his 51 book, Reunion and Reaction, The Compromise of 1877, and the End of Reconstruction. Under the compromise, Democrats controlling the House of Representatives allowed the decision of the Electoral Commission to take effect, securing political legitimacy for Hayes' legal authority as president. The subsequent withdrawal of the last federal troops from the southern United States effectively ended the Reconstruction era and forfeited the Republican claims to the state governments in South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. The outgoing president, Republican Ulysses S. Grant, removed the soldiers from Florida, and as president, Hayes removed the remaining troops from South Carolina, Louisiana. I don't know, this was like really fucked, but...
Why not hold him to democratic standards?
I've got no problem with saying you should have an election.
What about banning a Christian denomination?
Yeah, I don't agree with any of those things.
Well, how could we ever support that?
Because ultimately...
We're paying for that.
Because ultimately we have to make a calculation about whether we're happy with Russia invading what is a sovereign European democratic country.
It was not a sovereign country. It was controlled by the United States. We installed their government in a coup in 2014. They're very puppet of the United States and Great Britain.
But they're
not sovereign.
Do you think they're a democracy?
Well, their leader's not elected, so by definition, they're not a democracy. It may be a great place to vacation, or they've got,
like, that's not what it, like... okay...
country. It was controlled by the United States. We installed their government. How could we ever support that?
Because ultimately...
We're paying for that.
Because ultimately we have to make a calculation about whether we're happy with Russia invading what is a sovereign European democratic country.
It was not a sovereign country. It was controlled by the United States. We installed their government in a coup in 2014.
We didn't install their government. They held elections afterwards. Like this, all of these things are just lies. This is all just lies.
Very puppet of the United States and Great Britain.
But they are
not sovereign.
Do you think they're a democracy?
I don't know if Piers just doesn't know any. I guess he just doesn't know any of this.
Well, their leader's not elected, so by definition, they're not a democracy. It may be a great place to vacation, or they've got, we're getting a lot of money from, defense deals, or they've got pretty women, lots of great things.
Do you think you get to a point where you talk to Tucker Carlson? No. All of these people avoid, like, super contentious conversations.
They're not a democracy. It may be a great place to vacation, or they've got, we're getting a lot of money from, defense deals, or they've got pretty women, lots of great things you could say about the Ukrainians. They're actually great people, from what I can tell. I know a bunch of them. They're awesome. But they're definitely not a democracy.
So should Putin just take the land?
No.
So what happens?
I don't know. We should stop paying for the slaughter of the entire Ukrainian population.
Because you don't know.
Oh, okay. That's another popular talking point. It's just a bunch of young men dying. They're all dying. We're just sending them to the... What's that? There's a term they would use. Not the chainsaw. Sending them into the grinder, the meat grinder? Yeah. It's all the same talking points.
I mean, either he's allowed to take it or he isn't. Either we now say, yes, you...
Why is it up to us? I don't understand.
Well, who else can stop it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when, Congo invades its neighbors, like, it's not axiomatic that we should be involved.
But when Saddam invaded Kuwait, why did America go and support that?
Because there's oil here.
Did you support that?
Well, I was in college and drunk.
Did you basically agree with it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of dumb ideas. I thought it was okay to drink beer in the morning.
Do you think, looking back at it, was it right to do what America did with the Allies? British were there too?
I don't know.
Expel him from Kuwait? It wasn't a NATO country.
Well, that's the kind of war that in theory I would support. You say, we have, energy interests in this region, we want to keep it stable. When you start getting theoretical, like we're preserving democracy by supporting dictators.
We take energy from Ukraine, though. There's an energy component to that.
Maybe. I don't see the...
What I'm thinking is that
what I don't like is the moral overlay because it's fatuous and fraudulent. This is not a democratic country. He is a dictator. We've supported many dictators. We supported Mobutu in Zaire, which no longer exists because he was a bulwark against the Soviets. We fought and a million others.
No, but you've already said that you would support the expulsion of Saddam.
What qualifies as a talking point? I mean, anything can. I don't think talking points are necessarily bad, but they're just, none of it is true. These are all false. Like, the Ukrainian people want to fight, or they have wanted to fight. Maybe, haven't seen the recent polling data, but it's not like they're being forced to fight by Zelensky in a way where the population is majority against the war, like they want to fight. So this framing of we're being compassionate for Ukrainians by telling them to sacrifice their country is disingenuous. This is a Russian propaganda point.
From Kuwait.
Well, I don't know that I would.
Led by America. Well, you just said you did. right? So
no, I said I was drunk in college. I haven't really thought. I said, but theoretically, you can make the case.
Because they
in
had
the United
energy.
States, we need cheap energy. We're going to go to war to preserve cheap energy. That's not a crazy thing to say. Maybe I could support that.
Right. So what's the difference between that and what's happened with Russia and Ukraine?
Well, because
we need Ukraine's
the
energy.
justification
We need Ukraine's wheat. We do. 25% of the world's wheat comes out of Ukraine.
I'm aware, which is why you probably don't want to kill all of its farmers and sell all of its farmland, which is what we've allowed to happen. Zelensky.
We're not killing them. The Russians are.
A majority of the population wants a peace deal. Look at recent polls. Wanting a peace deal isn't the same as saying that they want to surrender, number one. Number two, it's non-responsive to him saying that we've just been supporting them running into the meat grinder. This is a Russian talking point. They all want to sign a peace deal, and there's enough pressure on the country to do it. Zelensky will probably do it. I don't think Zelensky would force the country to fight an unwinnable war if they didn't want to. But historically, over the past 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, they've had the desire to do so.
Well, no, this war wouldn't exist if it weren't for the money and arms that we're sending to Ukraine. It would have been over in one day. It never would have started if we hadn't said.
When you say over, what do you mean?
Over in one day? What, I mean, like but the Russians failed in their first pushes. But
what would have happened?
I think it's very clear, and I don't know that anyone would disagree with this, that
one of the things that I don't like, I wonder if he's going to respond to that. This is the same thing with pro-Palestinians and pro-ultra-Zionists, I guess, too. Nobody will ever answer this question. Like, okay, let's say that the other side wins completely. What do you think they would do? They never answer it. But let's see. I wonder if he'll actually answer it. If he'll just say, well, one thing we could say for sure is there'll be a whole lot less death.
Started if we hadn't said.
When you say over, what do you mean? What would have happened?
I think it's very clear, and I don't know that anyone would disagree with this, that Russia would not have invaded eastern Ukraine if the Biden administration hadn't sent Kamala Harris to the Munich Security Conference in February of 2022.
Like, they won't answer. They'll never, engage with the question at all, but okay.
To say to Zelensky on camera, we're going to make you a NATO country, meaning we're going to put American NATO arms on the Russian border. Like, you would not allow Chinese, your country probably would, but you shouldn't allow Chinese missiles in Scotland peering over Hadrian's Wall aimed at London. You'd be like, no, it's our, you can't do that on our border.
Because these people aren't constantly invading or warring with each other.
And the Russians like, no, you can't do that on our border. And we're like, shut up, you're Russian. You have no right.
There are already countries on their border that are in NATO. Does nobody know this or care? And now there's even more. Now Finland is also in NATO. Like, they failed at that. Like, this is just Russian propaganda. It makes no sense, but it's okay.
No, it's our, you can't do that on our border. And the Russians like, no, you can't do that on our border. And we're like, shut up, you're Russian. You have no right to determine what happens on your border. Piss off.
But if
it actually happened.
But my point is, if the defense of expelling Saddam Hussein from Kuwait was that we have energy interests in that country,
well, no one ever
and therefore we should kick him out, but that's obviously what we all knew, and it was done very quickly and competently by General Norman Schwarzkopf, and it was great military operation. But surely the principle and ideology is not different. And what's interesting is every Republican back in
they're idiots. They support the Ukraine.
No, I mean every Republican in '91 would have supported that conflict.
Well, whether or not
Republican
members of the Senate support something is support of it. I can
every Republican voter, I think, would have supported it. Whereas what's interesting,
35 years ago, I'm just saying.
What's changed is a lot of Republican supporters now, conservatives in America, are against supporting Ukraine anymore. And I'm curious about that change in what has been 35 years. There's been a real sea change, and it may be because Americans are understandably war weary. They're fed up with spending a lot of money on foreign wars, foreign conflicts. There's a good argument America hasn't really won a foreign war since World War II. You look at from Vietnam onwards, endless quagmires, endless problems, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on and so on. And I look at what's happened in Ukraine.
They do want Ukraine. Okay, you're just a propagandist as well. That's good. They do want Ukraine as a border buffer. The geographic features of Ukraine make it defensible against a NATO invasion. No, they don't. Nothing would help Russia defend against a NATO invasion. That is the dumbest talking point in the universe. And NATO is not going to invade Russia. It's a stupid talking point. Nonsense.
Ukraine, and I'm just looking at it pragmatically. Do we let Russia, led at the moment by Vladimir Putin, who I would categorize as a dictator?
I'm from Norway, and I feel like I need to tell you that we border Russia and are in NATO. Okay, what does the Norwegian-Russian border even look like? Fuck you. This doesn't count. Nobody wants to go to war up here, okay? Wherever the fuck this is.
So, do we let him just take what he wants?
But okay, I'll add that to my list of countries as well.
Even if he uses it and dresses it all up as, I'm doing this because I fear about NATO encroachment, which may well be his reasoning.
Okay.
But many people think it's not his reasoning.
Okay, many people think. Why would you want to put U.S. missiles on Russia's border? I don't understand. It's so obviously unacceptable for any sovereign nation to tolerate.
Here's the other part of the...
he's just speaking things that sound good and true, that they're non-responsive. They have nothing to do with what's actually being said. And
argument.
He has nuclear weapons. Why would we want that?
Look, a lot of people... Well, we have nuclear weapons too. A lot of the argument...
You guys have nuclear weapons?
Yeah, we do. Yes, we have nuclear weapons.
Why?
Why? Nuclear deterrent.
Great Britain has nuclear weapons?
Yes, we do.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, absolutely.
Wait. I thought he was doing a joke. Wait, what?
Really? You know why?
You're freaking me out.
If Ukraine had
Britain has nuclear weapons?
Wait, is he trolling? He must be...
Yes, we have nuclear weapons.
Why?
Why? Nuclear deterrent.
Great Britain has nuclear weapons?
Yes, we do.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, absolutely. You know why?
You're freaking me out.
If Ukraine had nuclear weapons, they wouldn't have been invaded. Can we agree on that?
I don't even know if he's true. I don't know.
We told them to give up their nuclear deterrent.
Invaded if the West hadn't said, we're going to use you as a staging ground for intimidating Russia. Like, why would we want to do that? Why not just allow, what we've done is pushed Russia into the Chinese
And many
market.
people would say,
how does that help us?
Many people in that region say, actually, what's happened to Ukraine is precisely why they should have been in NATO. Because if they had been in NATO, Putin wouldn't have invaded them.
Okay.
And also they say,
many people say that.
Also say, if we had...
What do you mean people say that? That's what, like, do you think they would have, or?
Into the Chinese
And many
market.
people would say,
how does that help us?
Many people in that region say, actually, what's happened to Ukraine is precisely why they should have been in NATO. Because if they had been in NATO, Putin wouldn't have invaded them.
Okay.
And also they say,
many people say that.
Also say, if we hadn't collectively basically bullied Ukraine into giving up their nuclear deterrent, he wouldn't have done it either, because they would have had a nuclear weapon to defend themselves.
This is super crazy.
Is it crazy?
Yes, it is.
Crazier than your theories?
Well, actually, I don't think, I mean, I have a million theories, but these are not among them. It's not a theory to say that Russia moved into eastern Ukraine because the United States wouldn't give up on pushing for Ukraine admission into NATO. When NATO did not want Ukraine,
but there's also
the criteria for admission.
But I think you're only giving half a picture. I'm not oblivious to that, but I would add this component to it, which is
There's a talking point that the UK can only use their nukes with US permission. Oh, huh. I haven't even heard that meme before, but
also not surely beyond the realms of fantasy that Vladimir Putin knows that a lot of that part of eastern Ukraine, they still speak Russian. He has resented the breakup of the Soviet Union, famously, and that actually he wanted to take back land that he believes should belong to Russia. Should belong to Russia.
Okay.
Do you accept that?
I think it's true. Look, I'm not an expert. I've interviewed Putin. You know, I've been there.
Am I tripping? Where was this widespread discussion about Ukraine joining NATO before the war? There was. This is all just a bullshit. There was none. Like the genesis of this war and all of this is very, very simple and very easy to follow and very, very true. Like, it's all like nobody disputes. Like in 2014, Yanukovych was ousted in Ukraine and he fled. Russia invaded Crimea as a response to that. Nothing about NATO, nothing about NATO expansion. It was because of Yanukovych getting ousted that Russia invaded Crimea. They took it over and then they upped their military adventures in the Donbass. And then that has just escalated year after year after year after year until finally in 2022, right? 2021, 2022, it exploded into a full-on limited military, what do they call it? Special military operation?
There are a couple of times I don't speak Russian, so I hope I don't get over my skis and pretend to know things that I don't. But what's very obvious is they have an interest and have for over 300 years in controlling Crimea, where their fleet is based. They had a referendum in Crimea. The people of Crimea are Russian and want to remain part of the Russian Federation. So he didn't take Crimea. It's Russian. It's filled with Russians. They had a referendum that nobody disputes. People should be allowed to choose their own government. That's the basic precept of democracy.
You did take Crimea.
Okay. Should people be allowed to choose their own government?
Did he just not say anything to that? Wait.
Where their fleet is based. They had a referendum in Crimea. The people of Crimea are Russian and want to remain part of the Russian.
That was all, by the way, that was held under like threat of, this is a bullshit election I use referencing, but okay.
Federation.
That was after they'd already fucking conquered.
He didn't take Crimea. It's Russian. It's filled with Russians. They had a referendum that nobody disputes. People should be allowed to choose their own government. That's the basic precept of democracy.
You did take Crimea.
Okay. Should people be allowed to choose their own government?
No, you can't. That's not the question. The question is, should people be allowed to just arbitrarily secede from parts of countries? No, that's not how this works. Should your neighborhood be allowed to secede from your country or your state or your city? Should your city be allowed to? No, you don't have the right to do this.
Yes.
Okay, so the people of Crimea voted overwhelmingly to align with the Russian government. So that's illegitimate.
That was after they were already fucking invaded, dude. What the fuck?
Government.
Yes.
Okay, so the people of Crimea voted overwhelmingly to align with the Russian government. So that's illegitimate. Why?
When did they do that?
Right after the coup in 15, I think.
Right. So after they've been invaded. Why do you think? Why do you think?
Dude, I can't. I don't know if I can make it all the way through this. I'll do like 5 more minutes of this. It's just straight Russian talking points without responding to anything that Piers is saying. And Piers isn't going to be aggressive here because they're friends or whatever. So,
you think so many Russians vote for Putin in Russia?
I don't think it was invaded. Russia has controlled Crimea for 300 years.
Yeah, but
like this is just straight Russian propaganda. I hope is his citizenship revoked? Where are they? Because they're in Riyadh right now in Saudi Arabia. Can somebody take this dude's passport? My God.
It wasn't Russia's, and in the same way that you say the people of Crimea voted overwhelmingly in favor. Of course they did. They would have been killed if they hadn't. Same way as in Russia.
In a secret ballot.
The same way Russia.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that the election was conducted under duress and people's votes were known to the Russian government? I don't think that's true. I think it was a secret ballot.
I'm saying it's exactly the same way that people in Russia vote for Putin. You think it's an overwhelming show of support for him. A lot of it is driven by fear.
Oh, okay, that may or may not be true. I don't know, but the only measure we have of popular consent is an election, and when conducted by secret ballot, if we think it's not the 2020 election, it's like kind of a legitimate election, that's what we go with.
Like that should I can't. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. This fucking Russian stooge just implied that the elections that happened in Crimea after the Russian invasion were more legitimate than the 2020 US elections. Like, He should just be I can't. I'm going to get banned. If I keep watching this, I will get banned. I don't think I can handle it. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. Zelensky's getting rich from the war. Should NATO be abolished? Should the U.S. send money to Israel? The morality of nuclear war. The killing of Christians around the world.
And have you ever met anybody who believes that if a free and fair referendum were held once again in Ukraine, that Ukraine would vote, rather than Crimeans would vote to align with the Zelensky government in Kiev? I don't think so. It was 97%. Look, I'm just saying self-determination is the core idea.
Who votes 97% on anything? Like, how could you not know that that's whoever? I don't know if we could vote on literally anything. Should the United States fucking outlaw oxygen? I feel like even that you'd have 5% of people would vote, yeah, you know what? They should just play. 97%. And he was like, yeah, that sounds right.
Democracy. They don't have it in Ukraine because they haven't had an election. They ignore the election because it's run by a dictator called Zelensky. If you wanted to say he's a dictator,
why can't Piers bring up the fact that it is banned for them to have elections during times of war? That's literally it's part of the, I don't know if it's Constitution or their parliament passed the thing, but they can't do it.
That's fine. You support a dictator. The U.S., your government supported many dictators, so is mine. That's kind of a fact of life. There are very few democratically elected leaders. Sometimes even our leaders aren't really democratically elected, as you know. I just don't like the moral bullshit that attaches to all of this.
That's fair enough.
Where we tell the population, we're on the side of democracy, and he's Winston Churchill.
I don't claim it's Mother Teresa against him.
No, but you have, though. You're he's a marvelous person.
I like him. I'm allowed to, aren't I?
I guess you like dictators. I've never said of Putin he's a marvelous person because,
Was Tucker involved in the Fox Dominion lawsuit? Was he one of the people caught lying? Yes, he was.
It's a little dictatory for me. I think he's really smart. I admire what he's done for Russia, but I'm not going to sniff his jock because he's kind of a dictator. But you're like, oh, I love that Zelensky. He's so great.
I do like him.
How can you like a man who's a dictator?
I don't think he's a dictator.
In what sense? He's not elected. He rules by force. He rules with guns.
Does Piers just not know the answer to this? He hasn't said anything? Does he ever? Or
kills his opponents. He's assassinated a ton of people, including, I know someone he tried to assassinate. Fact. How is that worth supporting? Do you feel a little guilty for supporting someone?
No, I don't.
Really?
No, I think we should try and do more to help him win.
How rich do you think he's gotten from this war?
I have no idea.
Does it bother you that he's gotten rich?
He's not as rich as Vladimir Putin.
Well, the next talking point, him and his wife shopping for fucking Prada or whatever because he's gotten so rich and he's stealing money from USAID. Why do you think people like Tucker become stooges for Russia? I don't know, bro. I don't know anything right now. I don't know. I don't have a theory of mind for these people. It can't be money. Maybe. I don't think so. Could it be ideology? Maybe. I truly don't know. I hope in 20 years there's some retrospective and these guys come out and talk about how they got so brainwashed or intentionally I don't know.
I mean, if all comparisons are to Putin, then all bets are off.
Putin is financially pillaged his country for...
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
He knows for sure, absolutely, that Zelensky is engaged in bad conduct, that Zelensky's done all these horrible authoritarian things. He won't own a single bad thing about Putin. Why? Every single time Piers brings up, well, Putin is a dictator or Putin has raped and pillaged his country economically. Oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, maybe, I don't know.
I don't. I'm not an accountant. Okay, let's say he has.
He's got a personal net worth of 100 billion rubles, whatever it is.
How we would know that, but great, he does. He's evil. We'll stick with that.
Oh, okay.
The question is, why would you support personally a dictator who's gotten rich on a war in his country, who bans a Christian denomination and who murders his political
Well, he literally only been...
Does that bother you at all?
Well, he's been leading his country for 2 years.
Well, he's done a lot of oppression in 2 years.
He didn't get rich on corruption in 2 years.
But can I ask you, when you talk to Zelensky,
been doing this
you
for 30
say,
years.
why don't you have an election? Why don't you stop murdering your political opponents? Why don't you let people practice their Christian denomination? Why don't you let Russian speakers speak Russian and read Russian books? That's what...
You can still do this. It's not illegal to speak Russian.
Do you say any of that to Putin?
Of course not.
Why not?
Because I'm not a...
Because I'm not what? Because the U.S. doesn't support Russia.
Russian speakers speak Russian and read Russian books. That's what non-dictators do.
Did you say any of that to Putin?
Of course not.
Why not?
Because I'm not his friend. I don't have the relationship with Putin that you have with Zelensky. I didn't tweet after my interview, "You're a very handsome man. I love you. I love you."
I didn't call him a very handsome man.
I think you did.
I don't think he's a very handsome man,
Okay,
actually.
hot is maybe what you said.
I don't think I called him hot.
Okay. Well, you said I really admire you. And I think
But you asking me to ask all the questions of Zelensky, you didn't ask
because
Putin.
he's a personal friend of yours. I'm not friends with Putin. I'm
I'm
just a guy
not
who
personal friends with Zelensky.
I read your Twitter feed.
I admire him.
You can't fool me, Piers
You can't
Morgan.
miscategorize
Personal friend of him because he tweets nice things. Okay.
me. I'm not a friend of his. I've only met him once, but I do admire his fortitude as a leader. I love the fact he stayed in Kyiv when the Russians went in. He could have fled. Many would have done that position. Everyone thought the Russians would win in a few days.
Yeah,
they didn't.
I agree.
I do admire the fortitude that he showed as a leader. Those characteristics I like. Doesn't mean
you called him a magnificent leader. In fact, I'm pretty sure.
I think he has been.
Okay, so I'm just asking, since I didn't call Putin a magnificent leader at all.
But nor did you ask him any of the questions that you want me to ask.
I didn't feel like, I didn't want to do what everybody does, which is, you're so bad, Vladimir Putin, meaning I'm so good, I'm going to give you a moral lecture. I'm like, whatever, it's your country. Country's actually doing great. I was super impressed by Moscow. I'd recommend it to everybody just because it's beautiful and orderly, which I like. I'm not moving there. They don't have freedom of speech, which is a prerequisite for me. But I didn't feel like that was my job. I just want to hear what the guy says. We're fighting a war against him and no one's heard him speak.
Why do you believe him?
I don't know that I do.
Do you not? I mean, you believe his reasoning?
I believe something.
You believe the reasoning for the war? You're fully all in on the
Well,
Russian.
there's kind of no question about that.
Well,
I mean,
there's
you
no question.
I don't really think so. I don't think any informed person, I mean, Bill Burns,
Only 10% of people in eastern Ukraine actually want Russia to take them over.
okay, I don't know how we know that, but I believe that, but it doesn't.
At the poll, same poll, you quoted me about Crimea. So
That wasn't a poll, it was an election. Which are critical to democracy. I don't know if you knew that.
The vast
You're a magnificent leader.
An election is a poll. They're called polls.
An election is a poll is not an election, right? So there are different criteria for polls.
Well, a poll can be an election, yes.
Now we're getting metaphysical, but I would just say, if you believe in democracy, you believe in elections. If you have a leader who's not elected, he's not a democratic leader, he's a dictator, which is, okay, that's fine. It's a foreign country. I wouldn't call any dictator magnificent, just because it seems a little
How could
more...
Zelensky have an election in the middle of a war, out of interest?
I don't know, how did Franklin Roosevelt do that in the middle of the Second World War?
Oh, is he finally going to? Because it's built into the U.S. Constitution. We don't have an exception for wartime.
How did he do that?
Because no one had invaded America.
No, that's
Okay,
not the right
well,
answer.
but how about
Piers.
The people could actually vote.
Well,
I mean,
there are
you've got half of
there are
Ukraine.
people making billions of dollars
Half
in
of Ukraine
business
is-
in Kiev today.
Yeah.
How about the non-occupied parts of the country? He's making a good faith effort to have an election, but he doesn't want to because I think he's pretty darn unpopular because he is a lackey of Western powers who sold his country out, and Ukrainians know perfectly well that he's getting rich, and so is the entire leadership. I was in Courchevel, France 2 weeks ago, which is probably the richest town in Europe. It's a ski town in France near Geneva. And everybody at the Hermes store was Ukrainian, using my money to buy $100,000 handbags. Nobody seems to care about that. I care because that's not freedom fighting, that's grifting, that's theft. And everybody in Europe knows that, and you know that too. Go to Romania. All their high-end car dealerships are sold out because Ukrainians have bought the cars.
So to be clear,
what the hell is this?
So when Putin invaded Ukraine, you'd have given him what he wants? Take whatever you want?
Well,
I just wouldn't help Ukraine.
I've said, and I really mean it from my heart. I mean, I have no I'm not getting rich from this, so I'm saying what I sincerely believe, which is pushing Ukraine to join NATO. When NATO doesn't want Ukraine, there's no strategic reason, no actual reason to have Ukraine in NATO, or to have NATO at all. We shouldn't have NATO at all.
Okay, that's preposterous.
Oh, there we go.
What's the point of NATO?
To keep
The
peace.
Soviets were invading Western Europe. Oh, well, it's been 35 years since they
Actually, to
existed.
keep peace.
Well, but now they are invading. Oh, I like how he clarifies. He says Western Europe. Okay, good one, Chief.
How's that worked? To keep peace.
Actually,
We now have the
How's that work compared to the past 500 years of European history? Seems like it's worked pretty well.
bloodiest war in 80 years in the middle of Europe because of NATO. So how's
Because of NATO? Because of a country that's not in NATO.
this peacekeeping?
Or you could argue, as many people do, that actually the reason is because Ukraine wasn't in NATO. Had it
Yes.
been, Putin wouldn't have invaded.
Yep.
That's a super. This is like an addiction, and I've been through addiction, so I'm not judging.
And he's not going to respond to that. I can't, dude. Okay, at 30, I'm cutting this. I can't do anymore. 30, I will cut this. We got 3 minutes and 40 seconds more.
But it's like, I feel really shitty. I've got to have a glass of vodka to feel better.
Are you mocking my mental health?
Yes, but I'm also saying that I've lived this, so I know what it feels like. It's the thing that is killing you. It's truly killing you, whether it's NATO or vodka. You become convinced it's saving you. So you wake up hungover and you're like, oh, I feel so bad. Give me a screwdriver. And if you have a screwdriver, you feel better. And you don't realize that you're starting the cycle again.
Would Putin have invaded Ukraine if he'd been a member of NATO? No, he wouldn't have done. Because then America would have been obliged to
Russia would
respond.
never. Here's what I know. For a fact, Putin said this for
Again, he just doesn't respond.
20 years. Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. They will not accept that any more than we would accept Chinese missiles in Tijuana, or you would accept Sri Lankan missiles in Glasgow. You're just not going to.
You know that people can join NATO and not have military stuff there. I'm pretty sure that was the arrangement with East Germany or whatever that we were speaking about. Is that like, okay, well, if East Germany, if we do reunification, we won't put like missiles, we won't do anything with East Germany. We promise. Like that was, by the way, the 1 inch eastward comment that the military expansions or armaments won't go into East Germany if we do reunification. Like that was what they were discussing. But okay.
NATO is a defensive organization.
How is it defensive?
Because it has never acted proactively, aggressively.
Where were you when the Yugoslavia war was going on? They were bombing the shit out of Christians in Yugoslavia. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That was pretty offensive.
NATO has always operated in a defensive capacity.
Really?
Yes.
That's how they created Kosovo? Defensively?
It was defensive.
Oh, it was?
Yes, it
Who was
was.
the aggressor there?
Oh, you know, my brother-in-law was literally there.
Just a minute. What you're saying is insane.
What are you saying? NATO has never actually acted unilaterally.
Okay, so the Soviet
It's never
collapses.
attacked anybody without being attacked. It's always been defensive.
Okay, who in Yugoslavia attacked NATO?
Look,
Just no, here's the part where you just admit defeat. Bow your head and
I'm
be
not
like, you know
defeating.
what? I bow before superior knowledge. I totally got this wrong. I can't believe I had such a silly idea.
He is f***ing up here though, because I believe there have been two NATO, I think is it two NATO missions without technically, I don't know if there was ever an Article 5 trigger. The NATO intervention in Yugoslavia though had to do with the Albanians, right? Being ethnically cleansed. And then I think Libya was a NATO mission, right? That wasn't UN. I think that was NATO. But usually it's in response to like ethnic cleansings or genocides that are ongoing. So, but I don't think Piers knows the answer to this, but.
The idea.
so you think nice, good guys in Yugoslavia?
I'm saying they're nice good guys.
were
I'm just saying that was
up
not a
to
defensive
no
action.
good-
That was an offensive action. Bill Clinton's like, I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to use NATO to kill you, and he did, and then created Kosovo.
Oh, was Libya the UN Security Council? Oh, it might have been. Libya might have been UN Security Council, and it wasn't NATO. That might be it. I don't remember. I have to go back and check.
database?
Because they were absolute genocidal
They may have
maniacs.
been naughty. I'm not defending
But that's what they were being defended against.
Who are we defending?
The Yugoslavians that were being pillaged and raped and murdered.
Like other Yugoslavians?
Yes.
Okay. Phew. This is getting intense. But
NATO is a defensive
you
organization.
can say it all you want. Just like you can say Zelensky's a beacon of democracy when he's not elected and he's banning parts of Christianity, but he's a dictator.
So just to be clear,
just to be honest about what things are.
Just to be clear, you would have let Putin take what he wants. Because what's the alternative? When he invaded Ukraine.
So I try and deal, especially as I get older, in the world of reality and achievable goals. And here's the reality. Russia is a nuclear-armed power. It's the largest country on Earth by landmass. It's also the remnants of a global empire. So they have a sense of themselves as a global player, and they are, because of energy. And resources in general. Uranium, I mean, they have a lot of resources the world needs. So they're a real country. They're not Afghanistan. You can't just tell them what to do. Get in line, bitch. They're not going to accept that, okay? So they have said, since the fall of the Soviet Union, you cannot have NATO on our border because it's a critical national interest of ours. So, unless you want to risk nuclear war, which we are now doing...
Can somebody, do people, they can't be this stupid, right? That they just don't know any of the Baltics exist? Do we just ignore these? Or does nobody know, does anybody even in Europe know like the geography of Eastern Europe? Or like what countries are there? I don't understand how we can say this. Does nobody know this? Are these like, is this like a hidden OP strategy? Is to just know the countries in Europe? Or does he ever bring this up?
You can't move NATO to their border.
Does Piers know about the Baltics? Or are these just like fake countries? I mean, to be fair, I don't think I've ever met an Estonian or a Latvian or a Lithuanian in my entire life. Maybe they are fake countries, actually. I have no idea.
You want to or not. That's just a fact. And if you do, you're going to get a war. We've known that since the fall of the Soviet Union. We promised not to do it. And we tried
Another lie.
to bring... He asked to be in NATO in 2000. He asked George W. Bush to be in NATO. Nobody can test that. This evil dictator who wants to invade Liechtenstein asked to be in NATO. Why wouldn't we let him in NATO? Why did Condi Rice say, well, it can't be in NATO?
He wanted an expedited path.
Why do we have morons like Condi Rice in our U.S. government? I don't know.
So when he invaded, though, what would you let him do?
We're in a hall of mirrors now. Look,
Not really.
Okay.
We're in a very...
What is it?
Say, well, it can't be in NATO. Why do we have morons like Condi Rice in our U.S. government? I don't know.
So when he invaded, though, what would you let him do?
We're in a hall of mirrors now. Look,
Not really. Okay. We're in a very clear moral moment in history where Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. It is a European country.
And we side with the
It has been
dictator, and we
independent
fund his
from
secret
Russia since
services
the
as they
mid-90s.
assassinate people.
Yeah, but what do you do? You let him
There's
take
something
it?
moral about this. Look, in the real world, we do things we can't achieve. And if we can't achieve something, we don't try and do it because millions will die. So watch.
So what do you let him do then?
Well, you start with a realistic understanding
This is antithetical to the entire foundation of the United States. We only do realistic things, but okay.
of the limits of your power, which is all adults have to do. My neighbors may offend me. I want them to turn down the music. I can't just go over there and shoot them. I just can't. It's against the law, and I'll pay a penalty if I do that. So I have to negotiate with them. Will you please turn down the music? Shut up. No, please do it.
What if they've already taken over half your house?
If they won't, like maybe threaten them. Like I live in the material real world.
Right. But once actually he's invaded, what do you do?
Then you have to decide, like, is it worth it?
Right.
Is it worth it?
So that's interesting to me.
1 million Ukrainians are going to die. Their farmland's going to be sold to BlackRock. The Ukrainian nation will cease to exist. They'll flood it with third worlders.
So what do you do? What do you do?
What would I do?
Yes.
I would say, like, if I took over the government in January of 2022 and we're on the verge of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, I would say, guys, it's not worth trying to impose something that this country will never accept because if we try to do that, we'll get a war.
So do you let Putin take Ukraine?
You don't let anybody do anything. You realistically assess
you either
what
do or you
able
don't.
to do because you're gambling with other people's lives. By the way, if 1 million Brits had died, you might have a different perspective, but it's very easy to be like, oh, more Ukrainians should die for the cause of democracy.
Let me assure you. Let me assure you, if Russia invaded Britain, that would not be the view of the British people. Our view would be to fight to the last man and woman.
Like, did he really just say that? You really think that Britain would just surrender? Or what is he... How many Brits died between World War II and World War I? Almost 500,000 and... Wait, UK casualties... Like 5 people. Thank you, guys. He's saying this because he would surrender the U.S.? I don't know. Over 1 million British military personnel died during the First and Second World Wars, with the First World War alone accounting for 886,000 fatalities. God damn.
To kick him out. But my question really is...
You really think so?
My question is...
He just got invaded over the last 40 years and did nothing, so I don't think so. I don't think you would do that. I think you'd be like...
Is he talking about immigration now? Wait, is that what he just... Wait, did we just pivot to that?
You realistically assess
you either do or you don't.
to do because you're gambling with other people's lives. By the way, if 1 million Brits had died, you might have a different perspective, but it's very easy to be like, oh, more Ukrainians should die for the cause of democracy.
Let me assure you, if Russia invaded Britain, that would not be the view of the British people. Our view would be to fight to the last man and woman to kick him out. But my question really is...
You really think so?
My question is...
He just got invaded over the last 40 years and did nothing, so I don't think so. I don't think you would do that. I think you'd be like, we can't fight back because we have nuclear weapons but no real military, so we'd like to negotiate, just like all conquered nations do.
But
they negotiate on the basis of reality. What can I actually achieve?
But respectfully, you're not answering my question, which you don't have to because you're interviewing me in this bit. But the question is, once Putin invaded, do you let him take the whole country? What do you do?
If I were in charge, then,
yes.
If I came in in January of 2022, I would say to the State Department, I would say to the NATO leadership.
No, I'm talking about February, end of February, early
At
March.
that point, I'm cleaning up a mess caused by the previous
Yeah,
administration.
so assume it's happened.
So let's say I'm Donald Trump, who's actually coming in that exact circumstance.
Right, and he's now wrestling with this very problem.
He certainly is. And
He doesn't want to give Putin the win. And that's my point to you. Do you actually want him to win?
well, I mean, if your lodestar is whether other people win, you will lose.
Right.
Okay, that's a shitty way to go through life.
But
If I'm trying to prevent you a win, no, I'm trying to win. I'm trying to win for my wife, my children, my neighborhood, my country.
You would have never, ever, ever, if I could go back 10 years and tell you that Republicans would be cheering on Russia, like people like Tucker Carlson, you would have never believed it. I wouldn't have believed it. Nobody would have believed it. It's such an unbelievable turnabout in such a short amount of time. It's crazy.
Once he's invaded,
I care whether you win.
Once he's invaded, what do you do?
Your victory has nothing to do with anything. What I care about is my victory.
You're in this as much as we.
Like he can't even answer this single fucking question, despite the fact that he's already told like 100 lies already. Like
no. I care about my country and whether we win. What's good for us? Because I'm in charge of my country. I'm in charge of nothing.
Is it good for America that Putin wins?
This whole thing has been a disaster. We're going to lose the U.S. dollar over this.
Oh, and now he's not even. Now he got off of that.
Okay, because we followed the advice of people like Boris Johnson, who have no skin in the game whatsoever, but they get to feel like a moral charge. You're like, we're on the side of democracy. Okay, it's so infuriating to me. I'm sorry to be so mean to the Brits because it's our fault too.
We can take it.
In fact, we started this, but you guys went along like little Pekingese. You shouldn't have done that.
But why are you not answering my question?
What would I do if I were Trump right now?
No. Once he invaded Putin, what do you let him take?
I'd call Putin. Let him take. I would
Yes,
say at that
let him
point,
take.
to what extent can you clean it up? You call Putin and you say, all right, this happened. First thing we're going to do is recognize it's not in our interest, your interest, the world's interest to have NATO missiles on your border. We don't want that. There's no reason to want that because we don't want to drive you into the arms of China. You are really part of Europe, and you should be part of the West because the West is Christian world that has a lot in common.
And what if he says,
culturally, religiously, linguistically, historically, and we want to be a bloc against the rise
and
of
he says,
obviously.
And he says, actually, I want Ukraine.
He would never do that. Come on, bro.
If you're the leader of the United States, your number one goal is to keep Russia, the world's largest
What is the United States? Why do you keep changing?
landmass with some of the world's deepest energy reserves from allying with China, which has too many people, not enough land, and not enough energy. So if they get together, they create a bloc that is bigger than you economically and militarily. So you cannot let that happen. That's number one goal. You cannot let that happen. And that retard in charge of our country just allowed that to happen because he hates the United States and acted against its interests consistently from day one, 2020 to January 20th, 2025 when he left, thank God. So that's the goal. Do not allow, to the extent you can control it, do not allow Russia to align meaningfully with China. They have much more in common with us. They're part of Europe. You guys don't want to admit that.
I don't be pedantic.
You're not being pedantic.
What do you let Putin take?
I don't care. What I care about, I care, but what I care about is the balance
He won't answer.
of power in the world. And if the West finds itself in a place where it's got a much smaller collective economy and a much less powerful collective military than the East, then we're in serious trouble. There's no balance in the world. The Chinese are in charge of everything. And so you can't let that happen.
But if you roll over and you let Putin take what he
roll
wants.
over. It's all this like dick measuring contest.
Let me just respond.
Roll over.
Let me just respond. If you roll over and you let him take what he wants in Ukraine, why should China not go and take what they want in Taiwan, for example? They would just take.
Well, they are going to take what they want in Taiwan.
I'm not sure they will, especially with Trump as president.
Part of China.
I don't think they will.
Okay. Why do we get to dictate what China does with Taiwan? Like there's fierce.
You'd be happy for them to take back Taiwan?
I'm not happy. I'm not happy with any conflict ever.
He won't. See, like this is like these are the maxims, the conversations. Would you be happy to let them take Taiwan? He's not asking, would you actually be happy? Obviously, he's asking like, would that be okay or should we stop it? Right? This is all just like stupid. This is just like the dumbest conversation ever.
Hate violence. I'm a Christian. I'm just saying that great countries have spheres of influence. So Saudi Arabia, where we are now, everyone's like, oh, the Saudis are interfering in Yemen. Well, Yemen's right there. It's in their world. Like they have an absolute interest in making sure that like nothing crazy goes on in Yemen. We have the same interest in Mexico and in Canada. And we have some crazy cross-dressing prime minister in Canada. So we kick them out because they're on our border. And that's what great powers do. That's what they've always done. Is what they always will do. So it's totally fair for us to recognize that the countries around Russia, no, we shouldn't be invading or torturing them or oppressing them, of course. But that's their sphere. And big picture, holy smokes, you do not want the two largest powers in the world, apart from the United States, to get together and align against us.
Why do you support Israel against Hamas, for example? Why do you support America giving them billions of dollars?
Well, I don't.
You don't support Israel being supported by America?
Well, I support Israel in the sense that I really like Israel. I brought my family on vacation.
These guys are all hyper isolationists now. There are no supports for any other countries for anything.
But do you agree with America supplying them with a lot of arms?
To the extent that it helps the United States, I'm for it, of course. I think what we need is...
So you do believe in America interfering in countries a long way away. It just depends which country.
No.
Your principle, it doesn't really apply in Israel.
I'll articulate it for the third time, just to be totally clear. I believe the United States, like every country, should, to the extent that it can, act on behalf of its own people and their perceived interests. We can debate what those interests are.
But that doesn't apply in Israel.
I don't know what you mean.
America's supporting Israel because it's an ally.
I don't even know what those words mean. I'm just saying my principle...
They're an ally, right? I mean,
I don't know what that means to be an ally. I mean, we have no...
It means that when Israel wants to attack in Gaza and attack Hamas, America will help it because it's its ally.
That's not what it means
so
to be
it gives
an
it
ally.
billions of dollars worth of
to be an ally, okay?
Well, fundamentally,
I have no greater allies than my own children. When they come to me and say, I want to do this, I assess whether it's good for them or not. And if I don't think it is, I don't support it.
Right.
Because they're my true allies. They're my children.
But why would you support America getting involved in Israel?
Just because a country that's your ally says, I want to do this, does not mean axiomatically you support it. Maybe it's not good for you or me.
So do you support America supporting Israel to the tune of billions of dollars?
It depends. If you can make...
What's in America's interest is what's happening in
It
Gaza?
depends in all cases. It's not just about Israel.
But do you support what's happening then in the support in the attacks in Gaza, for example? Because I don't see the difference between that and what's happening in Ukraine. This is a long way away from America. There's no direct involvement with America.
Well,
there's no mainland involvement with America, and yet you think it's right that America supports Israel. Put words in your mouth. But you don't think it's right.
I don't think those are the words that came out of my mouth.
You don't think it's right America supports Ukraine when Russia invades?
I have a simple solution. Let me explain what I think, and then that way we'll get right to what I think.
Am I wrong?
I actually tuned out midway through. I'm not exactly sure what you said.
You can't tune out when I'm right.
I did.
Just because I'm right, you can't tune out.
I didn't follow.
Like two high schoolers or grade schoolers or like two like 8-year-olds that are just given like a 1-hour crash course on Ukraine, Russia would be able to have a conversation with more depth than this. This is like, this is just like, it's wild. I don't know, man. This is just so wild. I don't know. This is just fucking retarded. I don't know what else to say. This is retarded. I can't. This is just like